Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We now have a negotiations committee that has been approved by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and we've also had a proposal as far as the PTI is concerned. In response to that committee, we'll be talking about the next step with regard to negotiation between the government and the opposition, and whether this will follow through. We'll also be talking about, of course, the military courts, the verdicts that we've seen, the sentences that have been awarded with regard to 9th May, and of course the pending Supreme Court verdict in that regard, and what that means for the future. We'll also be talking about whether we see this moving forward, the negotiations between the government and the opposition. We also know the demands that have been set by the PTI, whether these are demands that the government can fulfill indeed. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Agha, Iqrar, Haroon, who's a senior journalist. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Dr. Niaz Murtaza, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Muneeb Qadir, who's a legal and political expert. Thank you for being with us. And Barrister Safi Ghauri, who is of course a legal expert. Thank you for being with us today. Agha Sahab, let's start off with you. Overall, as far as this negotiations committee is concerned, where do you see this fall, where does this go from here in your opinion? We now have a committee which, of course, like I said, the Prime Minister has nominated, and we also have a proposal from the PTI. What do you think is going to happen? What's the next step in your opinion?
Thank you so much, Mahrukh. If I first talk about you can say demand of PTI. PTI has two demands, but actually there is one demand, and that demand is forget the by 9 and then we can go ahead, which is impossible. And if you ask me the overall, somehow or other I am shy to understand. After the announcement of verdict of my 9 culprits, it has been proven it was you can say a conspiracy against the country, targeting a country, important institution, particularly Pakistan Army. And if you add the background of Shahrukh Sahi, the charge sheet, it is also proven that he was involved in a kind of mutiny. So a party which is conducting terrorism in the country, and that party is forefront in the digital terrorism particularly, I don't understand how and why the government would go for a negotiation or parleys or talks with such terrorists.
But they have a presence in the National Assembly. They're very much a part of your political process. They're very much a part of your political fabric, because of course they are the opposition. So how can they discount them?
I agree. Then the government should not tag this party a terrorist party. I mean, every second or third federal minister is saying this party has been involved in terrorism.
Let me go to Dr. Niaz with this. I think Agha Sahab raises an interesting point. Dr. Niaz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Dr. Niaz, I think that Agha Sahab has presented somewhat of an oxymoron. He's saying, on the one hand, the government says that this party is a terrorist party. The events of 9th May are, of course, in front of us, and there is no linear way of looking at what's happened in that regard. On the other hand, they're moving forward negotiating. Aren't they contradictory in themselves?
Well, politics is a game of contradictions. No party can be considered a terrorist party unless it has been declared so by the Supreme Court. So let's just remember that anything that ministers say, advisors say, has no legal bearing. It's all, a game of politics to, try to gain a political edge, a psychological edge. But now that, negotiations are starting in order to create a good environment, a friendly environment, I think this kind of talk should end now. If they feel that, there is a terrorism done by PTI, that should go to the court, and until the courts decide the ministers should be advised to, cool it, especially now that, the negotiations have started. Now, negotiations themselves, I think that's the most important part. But unfortunately, we've had so many false starts in the past over several months. You hear that, a committee has been formed by PTI or the government, and then the next day you hear both sides contradicting it. With PTI, it's always unclear, who's really in charge. There are so many different factions, there are so many leaders, and they are not, talking from the same page. Understandably, given, what the party has gone through over the last few months in terms of arrest of its leaders, many being forced to leave the party. So that's understandable. But for this,
let's talk about those demands that the PTI has put forward. Muneeb, one, release of over 5,000 political prisoners, including Imran Khan. Judicial Commission to investigate events of May 9th and November 26th involving 3 senior Supreme Court judges. Let's look at these 2 demands. As far as the release is concerned, how is the government going to move forward with this regard? Another, as far as the Supreme Court, as far as the whole issue of sentencing with regard to the events of May 9th is concerned, with regard to the military courts that we are looking at, what is the situation there as a lawyer? How do you look at that?
I mean, PTI can keep dreaming. There is no prohibition on that, but I don't believe that there is any law anywhere in the world or in our own country which exempts you from legal liability just because you were able to pressure the government, or just because you were able to agitate on the streets, or just because you decided that you were going to have recourse to some sort of a civil disobedience movement, or because you asked your overseas supporters not to send remittances to the country. So all these things, these tactics, these are extra legal. They have nothing to do with the law whatsoever. The law has its own course. As one of my co-panelists just said on this very program, that, okay, fine, if any act of illegality has been committed, the courts could look into it. If any political party is actually a terrorist party disguising itself as a political party, again, the courts could decide it. So if, the PTI feels that hundreds and thousands of its workers and its supporters need to be released, then they would be released only by the courts. You cannot pressure the government into releasing them. So this is extremely unrealistic and represents the inflated sense of self that PTI has. They believe that, if they express a wish, it's a command for the government. But they should realize, they should know, they had been in government for 3 years or so, that this is not how governments are run. This is not how countries are run. This is not, the PTI founder's personal fiefdom. This is a country that we're talking about, and you cannot.
But the reason why, I'm going to include Barrister Safi in the discussion also, the reason why that you and I, we are all talking about the former Prime Minister Imran Khan and his party is because, we've seen the amount of seats that they have at this time, the amount of mandate that they enjoy on the national, provincial scene. And that is what makes them relevant to all this discussion. If they had not been able to get these seats, if they didn't have a very noticeable presence, then, they would have ceased to be of importance or discussion. And that makes it, important for the government, for them to come to some sort of a working relationship. No, Safi?
So, Mahrukh, I agree with what Muneeb was saying here. So, legally, there is obviously no way this can happen. There is the law is very clear. The matters are in the court. The government cannot do anything. Even if the government wants to make a promise saying, okay, fine, we will not prosecute, the courts can still go on prosecuting. So the government cannot obviously decide on behalf of what the courts were going to do with the people who are in the jails with Imran Khan. But there is one thing that the government can do, which is what PTI is actually asking for without calling it so. And that is to pass a new law akin to the NRO. And the new law will say anybody who has committed any crime is from here onwards, given absolute pardon. So that's what they're looking for. They don't want to use the word NRO because it is the NRO which led to the PTI becoming a popular party to begin with. They're the ones who cashed in on it. They're the ones who said we are the only clean ones. We are the only ones who are not corrupt. Look at all the other people. They've had cases against them that were wiped out. So we are going to go through the process of law. And Imran Khan to date continues to say the same thing, that he believes, and even the party's name itself, Tehreek-e-Insaf, the idea being that we are going to go through the process of law and we are going to go through the process of justice. Now they want to circumvent it. They cannot say it. So instead, what they're hoping for is that the government will give the suggestion. The government will themselves come about and say, oh, how about we give you an NRO? So the PTI will say, oh, it wasn't our demand. The government just happened to give it to us because they were so pressurized, and this is how we won. The government is the one who did it. We did not. That's literally what the...
Ullah, you don't think it's a good idea for the government to have them on a negotiating table at all?
I don't know how the government can negotiate. Okay, fine. If they were to come to the negotiating table, what is it the government can offer? Can the government offer any of the terms that PTI is asking for? Can the government say that we are going to take Imran Khan out of the jail? He's not in jail because of the government. He's in jail because of his own court cases. And the rest of the people as well, if they're going through military trials, if they're going through different sorts of cases that have been filed against them, none of them have anything to do with the government anymore. They were filed by the government, yes, but now they're in the courts and they will go through the process of law. So I don't understand. This is why I keep saying this. I've said this on multiple shows and I keep saying this again, that what PTI's demands are, when you look at them, it looks like they were made by somebody who has not studied the law at all. Every single time, it's the same thing. They come up with like even recently, one of their demands that the cipher case, which is taking place in a military court, or General Fez's trial, which is also once again taking place under the Official Secrets Act, should be made public. Now, these are illegitimate, illegal demands. The Official Secrets Act is, the word secret is literally in the name of the act, but they want it to be openly tried. And this is what it is. I feel like maybe they do not have good lawyers and they should actually get a lawyer on their legal team. Or maybe they have lawyers, but they continue to do this to stay relevant, just to pull the
Yes, it seems. A lot of very successful, very able lawyers, one has to say. Let me go to Agha Sahab. Agha Sahab, this is also all in the background of the $190 million, not dollar, $190 million case that we've seen. Pound,
yes.
Pound. The currency is pound.
Yes.
The case in question. And also, of course, we've seen the trial of the former ISI chief, General Fez. So how do you look at that and the fact that now, there is a negotiating table and there are people willing to sit on it?
Mahrukh, I started my discussion with this particular point of General Faiz Hameed. So, I want to explain again.
Ji.
I mean, he has been charge sheeted. In his charge sheet is very clear. It was a kind of mutiny. What the founder of PTI was doing in connivance with Faiz Hameed. And of course, they were not only two. There had been many within the party. So, this would definitely move on when this case would be decided and announced. So, we would definitely know who they were. According to my information, which is only for myself, there are more than 7 top PTI leaders who are sitting in parliament, who had been a part and parcel of that conspiracy and mutiny, and they were in constant contact with Faiz Hameed, and they were doing everything against Pakistan army and military installations under a complete big plan. So they are very afraid because they know things would definitely move on, and then their name would also become. So they wanted to settle down things, forget. So what is settle down? Forget my 9. It is not possible. As my honorable colleagues mentioned, military court has already given the verdict. How can we reverse it now and go to the point 0? Okay, we forget my 9 and we will have a judicial commission, and that commission would look into that. It is not possible now. I mean, cases are already decided. I mean, it is not a matter of charge sheet. They had been decided now. So it is not possible. So
when they know that it is not possible, let's take Muneeb on board with this. When they know that it is not possible, why are they now willing to sit on the negotiating table? Muneeb, as far as the legal process is concerned, with regard to the Supreme Court and the sentencing that we've seen recently in the 9th May cases, what is the position there?
There's a lot of hue and cry coming in from PTI. They're claiming that convictions by the military courts of at least 25 civilians that have been reported to have been convicted by the military courts is somehow ultra vires the law. Conveniently not mentioning the fact that it is the Supreme Court itself and a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court which has, ruled on the legality of the military court trials, and the fact that whatever happened on 9th May and all the offences that took place on that day came within the purview of the Official Secrets Act and the Army Act, and so the military courts did have jurisdiction over the matters. And also we mustn't forget that, it has been said that the due process provisions, particularly Article 10 of the Constitution, they are going to be followed. There is also recourse to appeal procedures, and ultimately, it is the Supreme Court's judicial oversight under which the military courts have been and would be exercising their jurisdiction. So any criticisms that have been directed towards these trials by PTI, they wouldn't have any legal standing. They are only trying to politicize the military court issue, and they're trying to gain sympathy, and not just sympathy as in domestically, but also trying to forge alliances with their lobbyists working in other countries. But that's what it is. It is not going to have any legal effect whatsoever.
But what about Nyasa? But what about the case, for example, the 190 million pound case that we've seen? Those that are very close to their final decisions, those at that point, and yet now we are looking at negotiations. This cannot forestall the judicial process. That is something that we all agree on.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you've seen this circus in Pakistan repeatedly. There were cases against PMLN leaders. Some of them even went to jail, and then later on, the verdicts were given by lower courts. But once they went to, higher courts, they got overturned. The same thing has even happened with Imran Khan's cases. He was convicted in 2 or 3 cases, and those verdicts were again overturned by higher courts. Now, if this lower court,
the point that's going to happen regardless.
Then, so you can't really be sure, how solid those cases are. And I don't agree that, the government has no options. Before a person is convicted, there is always the option of, not opposing their bail appeals by the prosecutors. Even after they are convicted, the president always has this option of, giving a presidential pardon. So, if you have political cases and some crimes done as part of that political struggle, then you can't really look at it from a very narrow legal angle. All over the world, this has happened. There was the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa, Ireland, other countries. We must remember that essentially these are political struggles in which some crimes have been committed. And so in order to, for a country to move on, it's quite possible and it's quite common for both parties to get together and try to find a way forward, especially in situations where both sides have committed mistakes, which clearly in this side has happened, both from the side of...
Fair enough. Niaz, I think this is a fair point and I want to discuss this more. Ji, Agha Sahib, you want to say something?
Actually, with due apology, these are not political cases. This is the basically stated position by the PTI. These are the political cases, but they are not. I mean, 190 million pound case is not a political case. It is a case of Al-Qaeda trust, and everybody knows what happened on the May 9. This is not a political case. Everybody have seen, and you can have videos what has been happening in Lahore, Jinnah House, or Mianwali Air Base. How could you can attack them in political cases? They are criminal cases, legitimate criminal cases, and some cases of the financial fraud.
Safiullah, as far as Niaz Sahib is concerned, he said we can't look at them in a narrow legal sense. Of course, we've heard what Agha Sahib also said with regard to this, but do you think there's another way of looking at it then, and not the narrow legal sense as he says?
So yeah, I think Mahrukh, Niaz Sahib was mentioning that these things happen all over the world, but once again, anywhere in the world that people are, eventually when they get relief, it always happens through the law. That's a fixed thing, right? There is no other way to do it. Like, I don't understand once again how else it could happen, or which other country these things could happen. And this was a very valid point that these are not political cases. Now, there are laws even within Pakistan, for instance, Public Order Act. These are political acts. These are places where the government exercises a lot of control. They can, in those cases, withdraw their evidence. They can not oppose bail. They can even say that they did not have a case to begin with. So they have that kind of a possibility. But what do you do when there is a charge of terrorism? The government has no control then. Then at that point of time, the government completely loses all control. Even if the prosecutor decides that he's not going to prosecute, the court is still forced to continue the prosecution. Now we have this, for instance, the Al-Qadir Trust case, which has been rightly pointed out that this is a NAB case. In countless cases, we have seen in the past that the governments have tried to withdraw their prosecution, but the courts continue to prosecute. Once the evidence comes about, we know that the courts have to prosecute. And I'll take you, for instance, to famous examples, like the Mahrukh Hameed case. In the Mahrukh Hameed case, the prosecution withdrew their case. They said that they do not have a case. The court continued to prosecute. In that very famous murder case, I'm forgetting the name, the one in which there was a murder in Karachi, the Shahrukh Sahi case. Yes. In that case, if you remember,
Shahrukh Sahi, yes.
And the court decided, and the prosecution decided that it had been paid, so they wanted to withdraw the case. But the court still decided to continue because this is a common law country. In common law country, cases are led by the court. So it is the court's decision. This shows that this is why I keep saying that sometimes I feel like PTI lacks political and legal knowledge, because if they had lawyers, they would inform the leadership as to how the law works in Pakistan. In several other countries, Romania and Germany and France, it's prosecution-led. In Malaysia and China, these countries are prosecution-led countries, so it is possible for the government to withdraw cases there, which will lead to nothing. But in Pakistan, where the judiciary has now become larger than life and it continues to take suo motu actions and do different things, we have to understand that this is what the legal structure of the country is. And given this legal structure, the government does not, in fact, have a lot of negotiating power. They can, if they make a decision, if they come to a deal, that would be essentially an illegal deal, because the courts are not bound to follow the deals that the government may enter into with PTI. And the government may choose not to prosecute altogether. The government may direct its prosecutors to stop presenting evidence, but that would still take time. They would still be.
Okay, fair enough. Ji.
In my 9 case, remember, I mean, if the federal government or the provincial government are not the complainants, we should not forget it. And moreover, what happened in the Capitol Hill? It was, I mean, even not a 10% what happened on May. So people were tried and they were convicted and they are in jail. So if it happens in Pakistan, so how can we tax such circumstances and issues and events as political cases? This is what I can't understand.
But then, as far as overall political process is concerned, how do you discount them from the political process?
You cannot.
That is
my
important.
9 cannot be discounted. This is rest assured. And Defence Minister Khaja Asif had been telling this very categorically, loud and clear. First, they had to accept they were involved, and I mean, courts have decided they were involved. But they first ask, demand, beg the state and the government of Pakistan for apology and for forgiveness, and then up to the government and the state of Pakistan whether to accept it or not. But they don't want. They want to take a leverage. Okay, this is what we will decide, on what condition we will go for negotiations. And that is why in the beginning of the show I said I'm shy to understand what for.
Right, fair enough. Thank you so much. I know that you're in a hurry and you have to leave. Thank you for joining us, Agha sahab. Muneeb, do you think that, as far as the legal process is concerned, do you think that at the same time, like I said, the existence of PTI, their presence can also not be discounted at this time or any time because of the numbers? And that is why we've come to today, we've come to this point. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an issue.
Nobody is discounting the fact that PTI may have its relevance in the political arena. I mean, given the numbers that they have in the National Assembly and also the sway that they hold over, narratives at least, politically speaking, going just beyond the law courts and the prism of the law, which is very important in its own right. But looking at it from a political point of view, of course, PTI has its place in current Pakistani political dynamics. But how can one reason with the unreasonable? That's the ultimate question. When PTI repeatedly insists that they do not regard the current government or any government which had been formed after their ouster from the federal government in April 2022, they don't regard any of them as legitimate political players. They feel so entitled. They are not really behaving as those in need. They are behaving as choosers in the situation. So when they keep on saying that we are going to talk with the establishment, so to speak, and we are going to establish back channel talks with them, but we will not talk with these people, and then they engage in name calling and all sorts of derogatory labeling of their political opponents, then it really becomes difficult. And it also becomes difficult for PTI to retain any relevance whatsoever. They might have a certain number of seats in the National Assembly. They might be popular or they might not be popular. That I'm not in a position to assess that. But all of that is absolutely useless if they themselves cannot behave like a political force. And a political party always engages in politics. They fight their politics, they fight their political narrative battles within the parliament, and PTI is not really known for that particular skill. They haven't even acquired that skill. The maximum that they can do is either propaganda or otherwise creating a ruckus on the streets, as they did on 9th May, as happened on 26th November. And then we saw, spate of fake news, which even was reported by Deutsche Welle, German publication, of how they had been using AI-generated images to stir public emotion. So that is the problem here.
But as far as, let me include Safiola, as far as these cases are concerned, how do you look at what's going to happen? For example, like I said, in the 190 million pound case, we know that the case verdict has been reserved. And, we've also seen the various statements from Alima Khan. And of course, as far as judicial inquiry, generally that is the calls for judicial inquiry that the PTI is making. So what do you expect in that case?
All right, so there is a division of opinion within PTI itself. Alima Khan has been sounding the alarm that she is certain that the accountability court is going to go against, the PTI founder and his wife, Bushra Bibi, in the Al-Qadhi Trust case, and all those people who were implicated in that case, Zulfi Bukhari and Shahzad Akbar, each one of them. But on the other hand, Barrister Salman Safdar, again representing PTI, is confident that the decision is going to go in their favor. So this is actually very reflective of the deep divisions within the party itself and the narratives that they are peddling. But I think that this case is not politically engineered, as PTI wants you to believe, that it is absolutely without merits. The fact that there are so many absconders at the very middle of this legal saga, the fact that 190 million pounds that had to be transferred to the state bank were actually transferred to the Supreme Court's account to pay off the liabilities of a land tycoon who then transferred or made donations in the name of PTI leaders or people who were at the top leadership hierarchy and ladder, or their friends of PTI. So all these factors, these are legal issues and they require legal consideration. And I don't believe that you can escape liability, particularly liability in the courts of law, by raising an alarm or sounding an alarm or creating a hue and cry in public and in media that cases are being manufactured against you. That is not how it works. Because you had been building your whole political narrative on the basis of demonizing your political rivals, calling them corrupt, and it took 3-4 good years for them to be cleared by the courts. Why can PTI also not wait to be cleared by the same courts themselves?
Do you think judicial probe can happen? Let's talk about that. As far as the government is concerned, this is another demand, right?
Are you asking me, or is this to some other panelist?
Muneeb, you.
All right, me. Judicial probe. Yes, judicial probe, all those options might be open, can be pursued, but not in such a way so as to oust the court's jurisdictions. Ultimately, it's the courts which are the arbiters of questions of law. So only with acquiescence of the courts. PTI cannot expect to pressure the government into forming some sort of a commission or an inquiry and thereby circumvent the judicial process. That is not how it works, and that is not how it shall work.
Niasa, we also, as far as the evolution of political process is concerned, we also want that. We also want there to be, we want to move ahead. We want there to be, parliamentary style of politics. We want there to be an opposition, and we want there to be a politics of issues. For that, we have to move ahead. So those are the other side of considerations that both the government and the opposition can see. And these are not just mere bookish comments or the way that the point is that things have to move on at some point from this kind of this style of acrimonious politics that we've been seeing for a while now, no?
Well, yeah, and I think to have that kind of a political reconciliation and political evolution, it's important for the government to take some confidence building measures unconditionally instead of expecting that, PTI, which has already been pushed into a corner, which is an opposition party whose members are in jail, forced to leave the party. It's unrealistic to expect it to make, a lot of, concessions at this stage. I think the government should show large-heartedness. The government has more stakes in political stability. It should make some unconditional concessions to set the stage for political reconciliation, to create the right environment, to give some confidence to the PTI that if it engages in political discussion, gives up on its, extremely confrontational style of protest, which often go into violence, then I think it's important for the government to, make some unconditional concessions. For example, they can release one or two key leaders, because one of the problems that PTI now is facing that there is no leadership to talk to. So if they release somebody like Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who's a trusted figure, who's been into politics for decades, who's been on the right side of the state for long, who's not a confrontationalist, I think that might give some rational, sane-headed leadership to the PTI, which can engage with the government and get PTI away from its extremely confrontational style. Because right now, the hot-headed junior leaders are, in command. But if somebody senior like Shah Mahmood Qureshi is released, I think that might help in bringing about reconciliation and give a lot of benefits to the government without too much risk. If you, for example, release Imran Khan immediately, of course, he's more confrontational, So that would be a high risk. But if you release somebody like Shah Mahmood Qureshi as a first step, that could help, PTI cool down. And then the next step could be looking into the release of other leaders.
Let me go, Safiullah. One of the issues that the PTI was quick to point out with regard to when they were in government is the the fact that there must be uniformly, every person must be treated uniformly, and that there is, regardless of any political clout or political personality, whatever we've seen, and that has been their traditional. They've stood by this, or they've said that they stand by it. But now when we say that their political prisoners should be released, like for example Dr. Niaz says, doesn't that itself contradict what they've always been saying? And is it not, I mean, for a normal ordinary citizen, then what would the law be? And would there be a difference with regard to those political prisoners that have to come out?
So it's an amazing question, Mahrukh, and this makes me realize the kind of double standards that PTI has. So as you rightly said, right now they want political prisoners. In fact, they want Imran Khan to come out, not anybody else. That's who they're most concerned about. They don't seem to care about the countless people who are in jail. And this points me to some of the things that I've noticed about PTI in the last couple of days. Just look at, I'll narrate a couple of incidents, and I think this will be sufficient to make you understand what PTI generally is like. So yesterday, convictions came out against May 9th. There is absolutely no statement from PTI. Now, these were all PTI workers. PTI could have at the very least issued some sort of statement sympathizing with them, so saying something along the lines of, how they will continue to at least challenge them, appeal these decisions, fund these decisions. Instead, they have completely thrown them under the bus. Another excellent example is that of Salman Ahmed. The very famous guitarist from Haroon. He recently tweeted out against Bushra Bibi. Now, in all of his tweets, he has tweeted against Imran Khan, he has tweeted against the army, he has tweeted against countless people. His basic membership has not been cancelled. But the moment he tweets against Bushra Bibi, his basic membership was cancelled and he was thrown out of the party. So this shows where the real centers of the power are. What is it that you can talk about within PTI and what is it that you cannot talk about? You can criticize any leader within PTI except for Imran Khan and Bushra Bibi. You can criticize the army. You can criticize the Supreme Court of Pakistan. You can criticize anything that is there and take it to us, but you cannot criticize Bushra Bibi. And that's really where they seem to draw their red line. That's really what we see now is their biggest concern. So this is a political party of people. Just a little while ago, I was hearing Muneeb talk about how there's a difference between Alima Khan and Salman Safdar. And you see, this should really be such a strong indication. Salman Safdar, well-known lawyer, who's looking at the case, is being given the same amount of weight on a case as a person who's not a lawyer. She's just Imran Khan's sister. And the party is now holding her opinion higher than that of a lawyer who has spent his entire life practicing. So this is what PTI is. PTI is, at the end of the day, a party that is upholding the same kind of nepotism that it said it would come out and undo. Unfortunately, that's all we see.
But is the government in a position to do this? Is the government in a position to make those concessions?
I think we've already discussed this. The government cannot make these. The government cannot do anything. I'm just trying to understand. Walk me through this. What would the government do? If the government says, okay, fine, we'll release Imran Khan, they go and they sign a piece of paper saying that Imran Khan is to be released. Can he be released? No, because it is the courts who have to be released. If the government goes to the courts and say...
So I want to move on, and we have little time. As far as military courts are concerned, there's a lot of, PTI is, of course, making statements that are controversial. There's a lot that is being said. The legal position, of course, is that there are military courts and they exist because of certain provisions of law, and they are giving judgments pursuant to that. And correct me if I'm wrong. Let's discuss the legal position on military courts at this time.
Is the question for me, Mahrukh?
Ji.
Hello.
Ji, can you hear me, Safiullah?
I can hear you. Is the question for me?
Yes.
Yes, Mahrukh, absolutely. The Military Act is very clear. Let me be clear. The Navy Act, is the Air Force Act, and then there's the Army Act. The Army Act is extremely clear in that any offense that takes place within the realms of a cantonment is to be considered an offense that is triable in the military court. And then they have also distinguished between those offenses. There are civil offenses and there are criminal offenses. Now, vandalism, looting, these are things that have been clearly defined in the Army Act as those that are going to fall under the ambit of the Army Act. This is something that the PTI has already challenged. They went to the High Court. The High Court also agreed that this is their initial challenge when the case first started. The High Court said that the military courts are right. They went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also agreed. So there is no question on jurisdiction of Army Act as per Pakistani law. The Army Act is definitely applicable, and the military courts are to be made, and the venue of trial is correct. Now they will have a chance to appeal if the trial was not done in a proper manner, if there was some procedural error. They're going to go to the High Court, and then at the High Court level they can appeal. And I want to also point out here that about 80% of all Army Act appeals in High Courts actually succeed. So there's a very high chance of success if procedural errors can be pointed out. And if they're so worried that justice was not dispensed properly, then they will have a field day in the High Court. I'm absolutely certain about it. So they should be happy if they feel that the trials are not being done properly. I would personally, if I was their lawyer, I would be extremely happy. I would go to the High Court and get them relief immediately.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us today, Muneeb Qadir. Thank you for your time. Barrister Safi Ghauri, thank you for being with us. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, thank you for joining us today. Agha, Iqrar, Haroon, thank you for being with us. Of course, as far as the government and the opposition is now in the stage of committees being formed and, perhaps, a further step towards that kind of negotiation. And of course, everyone's hoping that we will see perhaps an end to the kind of agitational politics, the politics of acrimony that we've seen, and perhaps have a politics of goals or politics of issues that we want to see with regard to democracy. We want to see talks on, for example, judicial reform. We want to see talks on issues that have plagued Pakistan and need across the board input from the government and the opposition. And we need there to be a move towards remedying those issues for the common man. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.